town. He had something unexpected come up this afternoon, so he is not going to be here, at least for the initial part of this meeting. He is going to try to join in a little bit later. So I will be watching to see any updates from him on my text, and we will just go ahead and proceed with our agenda. In that spirit, I'm hoping to turn things over to Sean Parkman, our vice chair, to get us rolling. In terms of work group members, I see present today, in addition to Sean and Tom, I also see that JJ is here as well. Hi, good afternoon, JJ. And I don't see that Kimberly has made it, but I think given that we do have a quorum, we can go ahead and get started.
Great, thank you. Yeah, so I think our first order of business is the meeting synopsis. So here's hopefully everyone's had a chance to take a look at it, and here's the meeting minutes.
Do you want a motion to approve?
Yeah, that would be great.
So moved.
All right, a motion and a second. So I also approve. So given that you first, I think we approved it because we had a motion and a second, and then I approved. So there you go. Great. So the next order of business, I think, is a legislative update.
Thank you, Sean. I won't take too much time. This may seem like a bit of, for Sean at least, a bit of a duplication since I just gave a report this morning to the PEB board. But right now, we had the PEB and OEB have been following a number of bills, some which are what we call priority 1 or 2, which means they could affect our programs, or pieces of legislation that have a fiscal impact, say through new benefits, but really don't have a program impact. Most of our bills actually are in what's called the Joint Ways and Means Committee. And as come tomorrow, we will know more about whether they're going to be assigned to a subcommittee and whether they'll proceed based on the revenue forecast. We also have a few bills, but not that many, that are in either the House or Senate Rules Committee. Now, both of these committees, plus the Ways and Means, literally can hold these bills till near the end of the session and then vote on them, and they go to the chambers. We have 1 or 2 bills that also are currently in the second chamber, such as, in one of the policy committees, which has a deadline of actually to see this tomorrow, not tomorrow, I'm sorry, Friday. And but not that many. And then we have a few that have been enacted. So I'm just going to go over our priority 1 or 2 bills. Specifically, the one that I think most people know is the Global Budget Pilot bill, House Bill 2878. This is the one that's sponsored by Rep. Dexter, establishes the multi-payer regional global budget pilot. PEB and OEB, of course, are required to participate. Has a number of other issues to it, including network disruption, choice, as well as that it's going to lead to a fiscal impact for PEB and OEB, and also for the other participants in general. It's currently in the Ways and Means Committee. It has a cost of $14 million for OHA in the first biennium, $10 million in the second, and then for PEB and OEB, when it starts in 28, we'll have over $120 million other funds limitation impact. There are internal meetings being held. to look at this bill and look at the fiscal, but we haven't received any word on whether it's going to move forward or not. Again, we'll know a little bit more tomorrow when the revenue forecast comes out. Are there any questions about the 2878?
I would just add, Glenn, there's actually an exception to the statewide cost growth target.
Yeah.
In that bill, as well as the mergers and acquisitions that has obviously caught the attention of the health authorities. So as Glenn mentioned, we're in active conversations around that bill right now. Thanks.
Yeah, that's a good point, Ali. And actually, part of the 120 million that are the PEBOA costs are that required payment above the cost growth target that's in that bill. Plus the stop loss insurance that we're required to pay, and then potential impact on our current carriers who would be outside the pilot.
My question is, why does it cost so much in addition? If it's 100, my understanding, it was a relatively small population. And if you're talking $100 million extra for OEB and PEB, I assume that's for a biennium?
No, that's actually for 5 years.
For 5 years, okay. So it's 20 million or 10 million for each OEB and PEB per year.
I could pull it
all right, that's fine. That's fine. I was if it's 100 million over 5 years, it becomes much of a smaller. When I saw that first and thinking that it's a relatively small population, it sounded like the premium, the increased cost represented 20 or 30% of premium per year, which just seemed not very feasible. But
no, it's over 5 years, and actually,
fine.
We also estimated cost for our current carriers if they lost this 30,000. What would be the potential impact to their premiums, because they're going to want to probably need or want a increase in their premiums. So 3140, this is actually better news. This is a removal of the 3-year contracting requirement for our consultants and actuarials that's been enacted. So as of January 1st, 2024, that goes away. We also have a requirement to start earlier the enrollment for, coverage for legislators in the PEB health plans. This, is currently in the Rules Committee, and, to be very honest, watching the public hearing, it probably doesn't have much chance of movement on there. Next, we have for OEB, there's a change in the minimum requirement of board representation to include 1 member of employed as a classified staff in the public schools or ESDs, and 1 health policy representative. We're going to look into a little closer about, since it's really a minimum, whether we can still keep our 2 health policy representatives, because it would be beyond the minimum, but we'll have to look a little closer on that.
Is that for both
That's
PEB
for
and
OEB.
OEB?
No, OEB.
Oh, okay.
Sorry, Sean, it's just OEB only. And the next, I'm sorry, and then also we have a bill that would require that allows police officers who retired from the Department of State Police to participate in PEB benefit plans as retirees, but also to receive the premium cost sharing they would as an employee. This would really have a 13 million impact in the first biennium and an 18 million in the second biennium. This is currently at Ways and Means, and again, anything at Ways and Means, we just don't know yet. We have a number of bills that, again, we're following. There's, as you all know, the bill to expand infertility benefits. That is currently actually at the House or Senate Rules Committee. We haven't seen any movement on it, but again, we won't know until we get almost near the end of the session. There's a number of prescription drug bills to put limitations on PBMs. There's also one that they just put in an amendment to get rid of what's called the copay accumulators. These are items where, programs that are used many times by carriers to help control costs due to third-party payments that come from the drug companies. Underneath the copay accumulators, they don't count the third-party payments as cost sharing that is incurred by the member. MOTA for both OEB and PEB has put in a copay max program, or at least will be putting in the next plan year. And underneath this bill, would not be able to administer that program. The amendment to this bill that has this limitation on copay accumulators is up for a work session tomorrow, but we are submitting a fiscal to LFO to tell them, or our legislative fiscal office, that due to this this bill, we would be losing over 1.4% in savings on the premiums. So we'll see what happens after that, but the work session is tomorrow. Modifications to our part-time faculty program. There's a bill, as many of you know, House Bill 2002, which expands gender-affirming care, adds reproductive health rights. We have a number of benefit bills, hearing aid coverage, some related to sickle cell disease, that have also, come up in this session that we're waiting to see on. That's kind of it, in a nutshell, an overview of what's going on with the legislative session and the legislation that PEB and OEB have been monitoring and following. Were there any questions? All right. Well, thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Glenn. Appreciate the update. Yeah, very informative. Thanks. So I think our next agenda item, I believe, is attachment 3. No. I think we're on to attachment 4 now. Is that right? Performance guarantees and value-based payments.
Oh, Sean, you were actually right the first time. We are on attachment 3, and we have an update from the value-based payment compact work group. Cool. And Tom is going to talk for a few minutes about this update today. So thanks so much, Tom, for being willing to share the latest and greatest.
Okay, thank you. The value-based purchasing compact is a group of Oregon health systems, medical providers, and insurance companies, and it's been sponsored by jointly by OHA and the Oregon Health Leadership Council. The important concept is the goal of moving away from fee-for-service towards more organized systems of care, to where we have um, um, the people providing the care who are sharing the risk for the cost of care. It goes from category 1, which is pure fee for service, to category 4, which is global budgets. So that's the general goal. And what OHA did was established through, I believe it was through the cost growth target work group, the idea of moving Oregon's delivery system along the process. And there were year by year goals. Now, you're going to be a much longer presentation about actually what's happening for OAB and PEB, and specifically what the health plans our carriers are doing in this regard. So all that I'm talking about is what's happened in regards to a change in the targets. So, and we'll have the next slide. This is just the, so if you want to get a sense of the work group that's trying to put this together, you have people from Samaritan Health, Pacific Source Care Oregon. Elizabeth Powers is a physician who's been deeply involved in the primary care payment improvement process. Care Oregon, Oregon Health Authority, SEIU representative and on the Oregon Health Policy Board, Oregon Clinic representing specialty care. Again, so this whole mix of people, and I've been on the group for the last 2.5 years or so, representing OEB. Next slide. What happened was COVID. And if you look at there's three distinct areas of medical service that we've been looking at. One, primary care; second, hospital care; third, specialty care. And about 3 or 4 months ago, and correct me if I've got the timing wrong, Margaret, but it was about 3 or 4 months ago, the Oregon Association of Hospitals and Health Systems came to us and said, there is no way we're going to be able to develop and implement new payment structures, because we are, number one, bleeding, and two, incredibly trying to dig out from COVID and the loss of staff and in a way, the constipation in the system of people being stuck in the hospital because skilled nursing and intermediate care facilities lost staff and lost the ability to take people quickly when they were to be discharged from the hospital. So what's happened is the details around LAN 3A and 3B, the important thing to realize is what we've done is that we've reduced some target percentages, and we've extended out the target for a year, with the idea of giving the hospitals and health systems chance to get their business back in order. And we'll see how that goes. The next slide, I think, describes things a little bit better. Actually, this just shows the types of things that the work group has been working on, coming up with models that the health plans and the hospitals and the medical groups could agree on how they were going to develop these value-based payment systems, mitigating financial risk, toolkits, particularly for how small and medium-sized practices would learn how to do this, making sure that we address equity. And attribution is anytime you have population-based payments, you have to attribute people in the population to a particular provider. So the next slide. And so this is in terms of the work that's being done, the primary care model actually is moving right along. Now, that's because there's about a 10 to 15 year history in the state of around trying to reform primary care payment methodology. There's, and you'll see this in the presentation of what Providence is doing and what MOTA is doing in regards to payment for infrastructure and development of risk payments. The specialty care models and hospital models are the things that are still on hold, and I think speak to the delay that I just described. I think that's the last slide. Am I right? Yeah. So if there's any questions, the main takeaway is the work is moving forward. It's going to be, we're first out of the gate is going to be the areas around primary care. And you'll, again, see much more of that in detail as we talk. We hear what MOTA and Providence are doing. Again, you're not going to hear anything from Kaiser Permanente because they're at the end of the spectrum because they have a global budget of which they are responsible for providing all the care within that global budget. So that in a way, the opposite of fee for service, at least for the vast majority of the care that they provide. But the main takeaway is the delay. And I think we talked about, Sean, I think we had this conversation a little bit a month ago. This just is showing how it is formally moved into the OHA and Oregon Health Leadership Council's framework. And Ali, maybe as a member of the group and deeply involved in OHA, you correct me if I've said anything that you think is not accurate.
No, I think you really nailed it. Actually, that's exactly where things are at, and I think once session's over, the new governor will have a little bit more time to define a new, policy direction as far as what healthcare transformation means to her. And, I think some of the groups like this one maybe are kind of stuck a little bit until then.
Okay, I agree. Any other comments or questions? So, Sean, you're on.
All right. I appreciate it. Thank you, Tom. All right. I think we're on to Margaret. You're up next, huh? Performance guarantees.
Yes, absolutely. So I will be speaking from attachment 4 in today's meeting materials packet. And I'm going to give just sort of a final update on the performance guarantees for OEB 2324 and PEB 2024 contracts. We've been talking about these guarantees over the last several months as we've been working on renewals and planning for next year's benefit plan contracts. And so today's update is kind of the final summary of where we've landed with our contract performance guarantees. So for next year's medical carrier contracts, our performance guarantees are going to remain at the current levels. So essentially status quo levels relative to this year's contract. That involves 15% of total administrative fees at risk. Again, 5% of those fees are on plan administrative performance, and there's a collection of measures associated with that. 5% of the fees at risk are tied to performance on clinical quality measures. And we have a measure set comprised of HEDIS measures that we use for that guarantee. And then 5% of those total administrative fees at risk are tied to plan financial performance. Next slide, please. So to note about the guarantees for both the administrative performance and the clinical quality guarantees, we use the same measures across all carriers. We set targets and benchmarks informed either by industry standard or in the case of HEDIS by looking at national benchmarking data available. And so carriers are all have consistent measures for each of those guarantee areas. For the financial performance guarantee for next year's contract, it's going to be structured a little bit differently for Kaiser as compared to Moda and Providence. We're making that distinction between the fully insured versus self-insured and minimum premium arrangements. And so the Kaiser guarantee in next year's contract will be based on best and final fully insured premium rates coming in at 3.4% or lower upon renewal. And then for both Moda and Providence, the guarantee will remain in its current form, which is based on a retrospective analysis of actual cost growth after the plan year closes, with that target for cost growth being at 3.4% or lower. Tom, it looks like you have a question.
Yeah, so I just wanted to make sure this relates specifically to Kaiser, the fact that we know that they're, for OEB at least, I don't know what it is for PEB, but they came in above 3.4 for the 23-24 plan year. So automatically with this, they're we will be penalized under this particular performance guarantee. Is that correct? And
yeah.
And
that is correct. Renewal rates came in above 3.4% for Kaiser this year. Yes.
So then for Moda and Providence, not Providence, obviously not for OEB, but in that situation, the performance guarantee issue will be adjudicated after the plan year is over, as compared to the Kaiser one. They're walking into it knowing that they're already have lost this particular one.
Correct. Yeah. So
I just needed that clarification.
Yeah. So for Providence and Moda, the way it works, well, and for Kaiser previously, if you'll recall in the current contract, we do have Kaiser under a consistent guarantee similar to Moda and Providence. So this will be a change for Kaiser. But so what will continue for Providence and Moda is that after the plan year closes, we wait for claims run out. And so it's about 9 to 10 months after the close of the plan year when we fully reconcile, look at where actual costs came in, compare those to the base year, which is, previous year, and assess, where they landed in terms of cost growth and whether or not a penalty applies.
Yep, makes sense. Just wanted to make sure I understood it.
Yep, you bet, no problem. And then additionally, we had some discussion about a proposed new guarantee around value-based payments. And at this point, we've decided to defer that guarantee until the next renewal. I think some of this goes along with Tom's previous comments related to changes in the cost growth or in the VBP targets in the value-based payment compact. And so sort of our decision to reassess our opportunities to align with that. And it also further allows some time for us to examine opportunities for hospital VBP. So I do expect that this will this is not going away. As I mentioned, it's deferred until next renewal. So this is something that we will want to continue to take a look at as we get a little bit later into this year, so that by the time we hit renewal season next winter for subsequent plan year renewals, we have this further developed. And so in lieu of that, during the current renewal process for this year's contract, we are pursuing some additional reporting requirements with our carriers. And this will aim to provide a more timely indicator of how value-based payments are advancing at the beginning of each contract year. I think if you'll recall, we've had some previous conversations in this group when we look at some of the data that comes out of APAC and looks at VBP levels, that it is somewhat lagged. And I know that members of this group have commented on how that data is helpful and interesting to look at, but that it would be beneficial to have something that's more of a leading indicator. For example, at the beginning of a contract year, the contracts with providers have been executed. So reasonably carriers know what they say and whether or not they include advanced value-based payment provisions and whether those contracts reflect progress being made. So we're looking at opportunities to capture more of a leading indicator in our reporting requirements that would let us know at the beginning of the contract year. And that would complement the retrospective reporting of where actual VBP dollars went in each land category, which comes from APAC. And of course, that type of reporting where you're really looking at where the dollars landed has to be retrospective because you don't know that until the claims are complete and you can do that retrospective dollar analysis. So we will be working with our carriers to incorporate that in this contract renewal and trying to develop kind of that multi-pronged approach to reporting where we have the APAC data for the retrospective look and more of a leading indicator on the front end to give us a directional sense of how things are progressing. And Tom, it looks like you have another question.
Yeah, well, just a comment, actually. The this second bullet is critical, and I would like to see it maybe something that we can understand better at CIAO, its implication, and it would be an interesting one. It'd be one where, you know, having PEB's participation at CIAO would be very helpful, I think. So I'm very pleased to see this, and I'm very hopeful that we're able to work that out with our carriers to be able to understand their the arrangements that they have, and then because the arrangements you have to have in place to be able to get from A to B. And,
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
the APAC stuff is just, again, it's a year and a half. It's like HEDIS, and trying to do systems improvement off of HEDIS. You need to have forward-looking stuff, not stuff that you get that's a year and a half to 2 years late.
Thank you. Yeah, appreciate those comments. Are there any other questions? All right. Well, I think we can go ahead and move on. Sean, I can pass it back to you, or I can introduce you, Shan, whatever you'd prefer.
Yeah, please do. And we're right on schedules. This is great.
Great.
Thanks, Margaret.
Yes, you bet. No problem. So for the next report for the work group, we're going to be referring to attachment 5. And I'd like to welcome Yishan Sung, who is with OHA's Health Policy and Analytics team. She works very closely with the APAC data, including the APAC data files that show payment arrangements for providers and are used to calculate OHA's value-based payment reporting. And so, Yishan, before I hand it over to you, I'll put one caveat out there. I know, as we've mentioned, this data is a little bit lagged. So today, what we're looking at is 2019 through 2021. 2021 is the most recent year of APAC payment arrangement data available to look at currently. But Yishan's prepared a great report. She'll walk through some of the information, and I'm sure be willing to engage with any questions. Additionally, I just want to note, I want to say hi to Jeff. It looks like you were able to log on, so welcome. We're glad you're here.
Thank you.
Great.
And thanks, Margaret.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, hi, I'm Yishan Song. I'm a pronounce she, her. I'm a data analyst with OPAO Claims database program. So today I'm going to present the VBP data from 2019 to 21 from the APAC. So we use the payment arrangement files from the APAC, or we call it PAF. It is the contract-based payment data between the healthcare insurers and healthcare providers. And in PAF, we categorize the payments based on HCP land category with one additional homegrown category in Oregon, which is 1A, fee-for-service that linked to some quality and value. So next slide, please. Before I go into the numbers, I just want to give you an overview of what kinds of data I include in the payment arrangement files and how we turn these numbers into the value-based payment report. So in PATH, we can see like one row of the data is one contract. And for each contract, we collect the contract identifier, we collect the provider's information, which include the MPI, tax ID, provider name. We also collect the contract performance period, which is the service dates, not the payment dates. We also collect the most important part, the payment models, which is based on the HCP lane category. And as you see, one contract may have like a multiple components or multiple types of payments. In this case, you will see a separate rows that you see. In this case, we see one payment which is under category 1A, and then the other payment which is under the VBP category 3B. So yeah, that's it. That's how we see in the payment arrangement files. And when we turn these numbers into the value-based payment reports, there are a few couple of calculations we need to perform. So first, one contract may not be like start or end in like calendar year. It could start and end out in the middle of the calendar year. In that case, we will prorate the dollars. So for example, if we want to calculate the VBP in 2021, in this case, the 100,000 will be prorated as of 50,000 in 1A. And then the negative 10,000 will be prorated into 5,000 in 3B. And another one we do is we use the absolute values. So this is we are not deflecting the total dollars amount associated with VBP because we know sometimes the providers may pay back to the insurers, then we see the negative dollars there. And in that case, we will use a positive value. So for example, here instead of using negative 5,000, we use a positive 5,000 in 3B. And finally, there's a hierarchy structure in the payment categories. We know that one contract may have like a multiple payment arrangements, but we always use the highest payment category in that contract. So in this case, we know there's a majority of the dollars are in 1A, but there's some shared savings and risk component in this contract. In that case, we will sum up all the dollars in this contract and then attribute all these dollars into the payment category 3B. So in this case, we will see all the dollars in this contract, which is 55,000 they are all category into 3B. So these are three types of calculations and layers we are doing in these payment room files. And before I go to the number, I just want to pause here for a second and to see if anyone has a question for the methodology. Hearing none, I guess we can move to the next slide. So for this slide, it's the percent of the payments that are categorized as VBP at the market level. And we consider PAB and OAB combined in one market. So VBP, we consider 2C or higher as the range of VBP payments. And for PAB and OAB in 2019, we see about 45% of the payments that are considered VBP. And in 2020, the percent increased to 49%. And then in 2021, it decreased back to around 44 and 45%. So it actually makes sense to me, at least. So in 2020, we know the pandemic and we see the utilization decrease. So that means the dollars in the claim basis, it decreased. So that's why we see the higher percent in the non-claims category. And then in 2021, because we see the utilization is getting back. So that's why we see more dollars in the claims and then the percent of the non-claims are decreased. And next slide, please. We also compare the percent of the value-based the VBP with between the PAB and OAB and the typical commercial, which we exclude the PAB and OAB. And we do see these two markets have very similar trends. We see about like 45% of payments are in the VBP. But we do see more category 3 in PAB and OAB compared to what we see in the commercial. And maybe more 2C categories in commercial compared to the PAB and OAB. And let's go to next slide. Thanks. So we also break the percent of VBPs by pairs, and we separate OAB and PAB. We separate OAB and PAB pairs. And for Kaiser, you see in 2019 it's 100%, but it decreased to 87 in 2020. It is actually not a decrease. It's just the methodology change, how we collect the data from Kaiser. So starting from 2020, Kaiser report their payments that paid to the non-Kaiser providers separately from the payments that they paid to their in-house providers. So that's why you see the reduction here, but it's actually not the decrease. And for MODA, we do see like they have a huge amount of the category 3 share saving and share risk piece in both OAB and PAB. And for Providence, the PAB Providence, we see about like 10% in 2C in 2019 and 20, but like in the 2021 data, we didn't see much in the 2C category. And next slide, please. So here just a closer look at the data in 2021, and then we compare the pairs between the PAB and OAB market versus the commercial market. And for MODA, we do see like a more 3A category in PAB and OAB where they don't have that much the saving risk type of payments in the commercial. And for Providence, we do see more 2C payments in the commercial, but not much in the PAB and OAB. And Kaiser is quite similar between these two type of markets. Next slide, please. And so all these data are all published on our Oregon APAT website. So I also provide a link in the attachment, so feel free to play around with the data and any questions. I see one hand.
Yeah, this is Tom. I appreciate the work, the analytic work that you've done, and what it would be helpful for me is actually goes back to my last comment to the presentation that Margaret gave. It would be very helpful to understand the arrangements that the plan carriers have in place to be able to then look to see how the numbers play out like this. So having both the retrospective look that you just gave us and understanding what the arrangements that are in place, at least from a general theme, I think will be very helpful for us to understand how we're moving more towards value-based payment models.
Yeah, thanks, Tom, for the comments. Yeah, actually, APAT will continue to work with the Margaret to think about like how can we get the data, which is more prospectively to track the VBP labels by payer. Yeah.
So this is Sean. I don't really have a question of the details. I do appreciate this this dive into the details. I guess I'll just say overall, taking the previous presentation, Tom's presentation, plus this one together, seems pretty clear that we're generally moving the wrong direction related to value-based payments. And I'm not happy about it. And I don't want anyone's to interpret my silence as that it's not a big deal. It's a big deal to me. But I feel like everyone kind of knows my views on it. So I'm kind of holding my fire. But that's not to say that there isn't some fire. So I'm looking for different options. I'll just say that. But I'm really disappointed in Oregon's market and in general with our plans. And the hospital association, and I think we should look for options in the future in order to continue this effort. So I'll just leave it at that for now. So I don't think it's constructive to go on, but there it is.
I'd like to just piggyback onto what Sean's saying. Sean, I appreciate, I was also disappointed to see how the numbers, actually looked like they worsened. And yet, I think I've been the one who's articulated the chaos that's been, as the physician on the group, I've heard from my colleagues about what's happened in the state, particularly in response to the pandemic. Holding your fire for a little bit of time is wise, but it should be significantly changing soon. And that's the reason that I'm very interested in seeing what the arrangements that the value-based arrangements that our carriers are putting in place to address this. Because if you don't have the arrangements there, the data is not going to change. It all has to do with, okay, how are the health plans working with the providers of care, and in terms of morphing. And I think we'll see a little bit more of that with later presentations today. I think we're going to be looking at some preliminary things from MODA and Providence about how they are changing. But I agree with you. We should have a relatively short fuse in terms of making sure that the the ones that we can influence, our carriers, are in fact moving forward in this process.
Thanks for all of your comments. Any more questions about the data itself, maybe?
I'm not hearing any. Yeah, Yushan, thank you so much for the information you shared today, and we will certainly continue our collaboration. Just touching base, I don't see Jeff on camera, so I'm going to go ahead and move us forward on the agenda. And again, we are running right on time. So we're at 2:20, and we are going to hear from both MODA and Providence today related to plans to pursue further advancement of VBP approaches. And so first up, I think we have Bill Dwyer from MODA, who's going to walk us through a few slides.
Great, thanks. Hi, everyone. So I have a few slides on MODA. Let's get right into it. So let's go to the next one. Just a couple of quick notes about the data. The numbers that you're about to see are calculated from our all-payer, all-claims database submission, and you'll find, in fact, that they match exactly to what Yushan just showed you. And so we also are presenting data for 2022, but I'll just note that 2022 is not settled yet because it's usually right around this time that we calculate the final results for some of our quality and cost measures. And so, the result, the data for 2022 will probably shift just a little bit as the rest of that data comes in. So let's go to the next slide. And I think you guys have seen this. So maybe we'll just skip ahead to the slide after that. So here's a snapshot of where we are with both OEB and PEB and overall for MODA, and you'll see that the numbers in the second column there for OEB match exactly to what you just saw. And so I've also displayed the PEB numbers in the grand total. So just a couple of notes about these things. So there's some things that are different in this data compared to the data that we've shared before. First of all, we included the pharmacy data. There was some the way that we report this data to APAC is extremely challenging for us, and I would imagine for most health plans to put together. A lot of this value-based payment data is not tracked in a regular claim system, and it is an enormous challenge for us. And so it's also been a struggle to understand some of the administrative rules behind how this is supposed to be done. So anyway, it wasn't clear to us back a couple of years ago that we were supposed to be including pharmacy data. So that's in there now. The majority of the dollars that we have in category 1, those are some of the members that don't have a PCP assigned, or in the case of OEB, the members that are not in the CCM. And so if you're not in the CCM, then a lot of the value-based payment mechanisms that we have in place for OEB would not apply to you. There are some of the dollars in category 3A that have been increasing as membership moves into the CCM plan. And so we've done some more auto attribution in the past year. We've been trying to get as many members as possible to be in the CCM plan for OEB, and so that's why that number increases a bit. We're doing the same thing for PEB, and so you're seeing the PEB just through auto attribution, the number of members that we're connecting to PCP is growing. Almost all of the providers who are in this model, they're going in the CCM model that we have, they have both cost and quality measures applied, but there's just a tiny fraction of some of them that for various arcane reasons don't have both, which are rounding off to 0 in that second row. In the way that this is displayed. For the most part, all of our dollars are going into the 3A. 4A would be some of our primary care agreements where we have capitation, prospective capitation, the way we refer to that, we're paying capitation instead of fee-for-service. Even for some of those agreements, though, if you have a member that is assigned to you as a primary care clinic, you get capitated for that member. But if some other member happens to sort of wander in the door, in the interest of no doors being closed to somebody in primary care, you still have the clinic still wants to treat them, but the capitation agreement doesn't cover that. And so there's some amount of fee-for-service there as well. Okay. Any questions about the 2021? We'll go into more detail too. I got some slides with some bullet points. So 2022, this is preliminary, like I mentioned, we don't have all the data yet. The spending in particularly in categories 2A and 3A is going to increase as we pay out the year-end incentives. We've been a little bit disappointed in the provider uptake on our capitation program. So we went from 3% in 2021. It looks like we are probably going to end up around 1% for 2022. And that is simply because a lot of providers have just decided, you know what, fee for service, it's working pretty well for us, and this capitation is hard to understand, and rather just go back to the fee for service. And so we had a bunch of the providers drop out. We've got a number of ideas that we are working on as a way to make this program more attractive and to simplify the accounting and the reporting of it in an attempt to get more providers to sign up for it. Those changes are not going to happen in 2023. But it's something that we're working on. I mean, in other words, what I'm trying to say is we're very concerned, just as probably you would be, that our 4A dollars have decreased, and we're trying to figure out what are we going to do about that. And we do have some ideas, but we're not ready to talk about the specifics of them just yet. And already a hand, so go ahead.
This is Tom. I'm seeing movement towards 3A. I'm not hearing much comment about 3B. Is that part, that's the shared risk, upside and downside?
Yeah, let's talk about that. I've got a slide talking about 3A and 3B, and I was intended to go into that in a little more detail.
Fine. I forgot that was part of it. So you hold it and I'll wait.
Sounds good. All right, well, let's go to the next slide then. So here's my bullet points I mentioned. So here's some of the things that we're working on and that we've got in place for 2023 and that we are working on during 2023 that we plan to roll out in 2024. So first of all, this is a pretty major development for us, and we're pretty proud of this. The top bullet point there, the new MOTA Commercial Primary Care Incentive Program. The approach that we're taking at MOTA is that we're trying to get away from this concept of a value-based payment program is a program that a plan sponsor like an employer group or whatever will approve or not approve or sign on to or whatever. Instead, we're looking at this as this is the way MOTA does business. This is the way we pay providers. And so because when you think about it, if you're a healthcare provider, you don't care who somebody's employer is. You just want to treat your members and hopefully you want to treat everyone with the same high quality. And so, and it just is just difficult in a similar way to the conversations that you guys have seen, in that providers would like to limit the number of different types of quality measures and different types of program structures that all of the different payers have. They're also interested in, hey, if you're one payer, how about not having 20 different models from the same payer, depending on who their employer is? And so that's the approach that we're trying to take. And so what we've done is we've just said, look, our commercial business, this is the way we're paying, for our primary care and commercial business. We're having a combination of value-based payment incentives that's going to apply to all or substantially all of our business, of which OWEB and PEB, of course, is a big part. And so there's going to be a number of benefits to OWEB and PEB for this. For one thing, it's going to be a much bigger pool of membership that the provider is now accountable for results for. And that's going to make the incentive for them to do well with OWEB and PEB members that much more powerful. Because now it's not just OWEB and PEB members, it's all members. So the providers are going to have to pay a lot more attention to it. The model has the same components as the coordinated care model that we have for OWEB and PEB, except for the PC/PCH fees. But the other components are the same. And then in addition, one thing that we did for 2022 for our commercial business, for the rest of our commercial business, is we instituted another requirement that says that the providers have to engage with us. For a lot of these programs, you can imagine it is feasible that a provider could do nothing. They could just, they could sign the agreement, but then they could just have business as usual. And at the end of the year, maybe they earn a bonus, or maybe they don't. I mean, if they earn a bonus, great. But maybe they earned the bonus because they were lucky, or because things just sort of worked out well for them. And so what we're moving toward now is we're going to start paying these incentives for the providers who do well, but also engage with us, so that we can feel more confident that the results that we're seeing are results that are coming from our joint collaboration and action to make the system better. And so engagement with data sharing is an element of that we've included for 2023, and it'll be included in the future too. So a number of things about this new model that we're pretty excited about. That even though it's nominally it's for the rest of our commercial business, we think that is going to have a significant positive effect on the impact of the VBP programs that are in place for OWEB and PEB members. So then just to mention the other things, I think we had mentioned the behavioral health program. I think in meetings past, hopefully folks on this call remember some of the details of that. We're paying additional incentives for providers to conduct what we call feedback-informed treatment, just using more data. It's just a more sophisticated way of measuring and tracking the effectiveness of behavioral health services. And we're combining that with a total cost of care incentive also for behavioral health for some of these specific members that they're likely paying very close attention to already. So that's pretty good. And then we're moving into some additional models. This is new for us to have an episode-based cost of care model and quality measures for specialists. And we have been working on that pretty hard over the last couple of months so that we can be ready to roll that out for next year. And then finally, we have been now for quite some time working on measures of health equity that get at outcomes, and particularly some of the quality and utilization measures to address some of the disparities. It was our intent in 2023 to introduce this as a report-only measure, just as an additional way to raise awareness and get some of our providers thinking about some of these. An example of that might be, what is the ratio at which when a member comes and sees their primary care doctor, how often do they get referred out to a specialist or for a diagnostic test or something? Because when we look at our data, we see that disparities exist. And so that's the intent of this, is to sort of highlight some of those and see if we can't come up with a way that our provider network can agree on to hold ourselves accountable for that. So a lot going on in 2023, all these things. And certainly we'll look forward to giving you some more updates as some of this stuff becomes more concrete. So I don't see any hands up yet, but so we'll keep going. And then thought it would be helpful to put this slide in here. This is for our new program that I mentioned in the first bullet point on the next slide. And so these are all of the different components of our primary care model that exists now for OEB and for PEB that we're rolling out to the rest of our network, particularly. So the way I have these shaded there is you can see that the top 3 of them, they are going to apply to all of our business, or substantially all. There's some nuances there. We're not able to bring in all of the ASO groups right away. I should just mention, when I talk about our full commercial book of business, it's mainly, so far there's some of the ASO that's not going to come on board right away. But these are the components of the model. We do have full prospective capitation instead of fee for service. We have a total cost of care incentive, we have quality incentives, and then care management fees. And so in a lot of that, so the way, and I'll just also mention the way MODA reports our data. We are trying to report this in the most, I guess, in the most fair way possible. And I've mentioned this example before, but just to point out, even though we do have these 4A models in place for a health system, like, just to pick an example, like Adventist Health, who historically has had a single tax ID for their entire business, including professional, specialty, primary care, and hospital. The existence of this primary care capitation agreement for their primary care, we're not putting all of the hospital dollars and saying, oh yeah, it's a 4A model just because it includes some primary care capitation. Anyway, all of these things do exist in both our current model and our new model. All right, well, let's go to the next one, and this is the one I think it's going to get to. Oh, I got one more. So just for in terms of how we think 2023 is going to shape up, we'll probably get we're going to continue to increase in 3A and 2C. Category 3 value-based payment, particularly for hospitals, has been a bit challenging for various reasons. We can talk about some of them, but essentially we are pretty limited by Senate Bill 1067 in that just, who wants to take on additional downside risk when there's no opportunity for upside? So that's an enormous challenge in getting hospitals to sign on. But like I mentioned, we do expect by next year to have some specialist models in place. And we got some other ideas for things that we're talking about for 2024 and for 2025. So, but we do expect it, but the high level bullet here is we do expect that our performance will improve in 2023 compared to 2022.
So can I just respond to that? I know it was a rhetorical question, but the cap is 200% of Medicare. So there is a lot of room there to negotiate. I understand the hospitals aren't interested in it, but that doesn't mean that we have to agree with their position. That 200% is well more than adequate. And so there's a lot of room between 100 and 200% to negotiate. So I just want to put that out there, that I understand that's the hospital's position, but I don't agree with it.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, that's an entirely large and interesting, but maybe separate subject that we wouldn't mind talking about, and it's at a different time and place when there's more time. Okay, well, let's go to the next slide. And I think this one then is my last one. So just to address Tom, this is just some of the I wanted to put this up here to explain some of the nuances of category 3A and 3B models and sort of highlight some of the challenges that we're having as we try to design a model that will be attractive to a provider. And so this is just a conceptual, just to show some of the concepts. And you've got these 3 bars here, which sort of represent, they're like cost bars. You can look at this. And so you imagine that 3A incentive, so that's upside incentive only. And if the bar represents the total cost, then and you're starting from the left side, it would be 0, and the cost reaches a budget target, which is that dotted line, and then the provider can start earning some money. And the shaded area there, that would represent sort of the probability of earning it. And so the farther so the probability sort of would decrease the further away that you get from the budget. And on average, maybe a provider could expect to earn the budget plus a little bit more, depending on the variability of how things shake out. And so that would be sort of a conceptual model of the 3A incentive. Well, then you start talking about, well, let's add some downside risk. Okay, well, then what that looks like is then you have two-sided variability. So you see that the shading in the two-sided model is this, it sort of decreases on each side of the budget, the equal probability that maybe you'll go above the budget or below the budget. But the thing is, what that averages out to is the budget. If the budget represents your best guess for what you think the cost is going to be, and it's equally likely to be either ahead or behind that, is then the expected value is just going to be right there at the budget. And so what that model ends up looking like is you have a much wider band of uncertainty. You look at the shaded areas, it's much wider because you have twice as much variability as the previous model. And a lower expected payout because now you have downside risk. And so if you take the same exact situation and try to go from 3A to 3B, that is very not attractive to a provider who's looking at this. I mean, there's a lot of things that we negotiate over, which are unit cost rates and various contract terms. But just switching from 3A to 3B, leaving all else equal, that is significantly less attractive to a logical decision maker at a provider organization. But there's things that you can do to make it more attractive. So what you can do is you raise the budget a little bit, and that way the expected value is more in line with an upside only incentive. And then there's things that you might be able to do with risk corridors and limiting the downside or upside liability to sort of compress the variability of that to make the cost more predictable for a provider. And those are things that we can do in tweaking the design of the value-based payment model to make it more attractive. The ironic thing is, so once you do all that, if you look at the bottom row of that, it kind of looks like the top row. It kind of looks like the 3A in terms of both the expected cost and the variability. Leaving the question of what did you gain from that? The answer is I don't know, but we're still we're doing the best we can to create some models that will meet the 3B definition and advance our providers along. And there are certain things that we can do to make a 3B model attractive enough that we'll get providers to adopt it. But certainly there's implications. The more we tweak the model to get it to be something that we can get providers to sign on to, the more it starts to look like the model we already have.
It will be very interesting to see I understand exactly what you just said, Bill, and I appreciate the interaction that you're having with your provider groups, primary care groups that you're negotiating with. It'll be interesting to see what happens around the state in regards to movement from 3A arrangements to 3B. And maybe the conversation has to be, maybe there needs to be pretty clear documentation that making that change makes a difference, for, again, global systems. The reason we're making the changes is that what we're doing now is not sustainable over the long term. And at least that's that's the theory. That's what the conversation has been, and it's where the compact has kind of landed, at least as far as I'm concerned. But maybe OHA and the Oregon Health Leadership Council needs to, as sponsors of this work, need to, sponsor that conversation of should we be aiming at 3A versus 3B.
Yeah, that's kind of what I mentioned earlier, Tom, is really trying to, I guess, get some buy-in or somebody to stand behind the work of the VBP compact and even statewide cost growth, because I think, as you well know, it's leaking a little bit, but we're still trying to get that.
I get
backing.
it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that was thank you. That helped. That helped my understanding a lot, Bill, and I understand the challenge.
Sure. And Jeff has a question.
Yeah, I mean, we've alluded to margins that hospitals are working on, and how much money do they really need to operate? I did a cursory study of operating margins for hospitals over the last 5 years, and basically they've averaged 2.6%. Now, what does that translate? I mean, that's just one number. And in having these discussions, I would really like to see us have some more substantive data on what the difference is between, profitability and operation, so that we're not put in a position of having to make subjective evaluation. I'd like some data that I could stand on. I don't know whether you're getting any of that, Tom, in your committee work, but
we're not. We really are at. We are not at a point of analyzing data. We really are developing the conceptual framework for how we move forward, and then as mentioned, or I showed on that slide, the primary care part is being worked out. The models for it are being worked out, but a hospital and specialty care, definitely the specialty care will go the direction that Bill just described in terms of episodes of, it'll be some episodes of care with some quality metrics to make sure that the work is being done in a quality manner. The hospital part, I have no idea what's going to happen. It probably will need to be one where there's upside and downside risk.
Sure.
But we are not, this is not an analytic group. It really is trying to just come up with the roadmap as such.
Well, surely, Tom, having some analytics helps guide the path that you're pursuing.
Yeah. Yes, agreed. And
so
I'm sorry.
Go ahead. I'm just going to say I wholeheartedly support the triple aim, and we don't need to. I mean, that's a great framework, and value-based payments fit inside of that. And pursuing a sustainable healthcare system that provides quality and from a cost basis, it has no more in it than is necessary to provide the other two would be my goal. And I'd just like us to have assurance that we're playing inside the guardrails.
I think the biggest issue I've seen is just the data lag. That's what's not really nice to see this data from ODA is have a look at 2022 and even 2023 and have some projections. I think what I've seen even recently is up to 2021 if we're lucky on hospital data.
Yeah.
Anyway, I'll get off my soapbox.
Well, and so Jeff, I wanted to chime in and note, I think that's something we can take back maybe and talk about further and see, what other information sources we might be able to tap into to kind of get at some of the questions you raised about, hospitals, margins and profitability and such. So we can certainly do some further research.
Great, thank you, Margaret.
You bet. And I do want to note, I don't want to cut off questions, but I do want to note we are running a little behind on the agenda at this point. So just want to check if there's any final questions for Bill. And hearing none. Thanks so much, Bill. I think, this is certainly an ongoing conversation. So we appreciate the information you shared today, and we will certainly have more questions for you to come.
Great. Happy to do it. See you guys later.
Thank you. And with that, we're going to move on. We have Stephanie Dreyfus from Providence Health Plan. She is going to walk through a similar update on planned advancement of value-based payments for Providence. Stephanie, thanks for being here. And as noted, we are behind on the agenda, so please, feel free to take your time, and we will we'll make it work.
Okay. Thank you all for having us. I have a lot less data than Bill, but I'm really focused on where we went and where we advanced in 2023 and where we anticipate going in 2024. So I wanted to start by just refreshing on some of the programs we have had in place for a very, very long time. We have a quality pay for performance program that we have in several of our primary care groups that we, again, have had in place for a very long time, but we keep that program very fresh. It is a risk-based program, and the quality metrics are reviewed every single year. And I wanted to highlight that we added in 2023 as social determinant of health measure, which the measure is the percentage of patients screened with a tool that includes housing, food, and transportation. So that's a really important addition, again, to our Pay for Performance program to keep it relevant and really updated. And again, we try, as the opportunity arises, to put that program into more primary care groups. We also, in 2023, developed a member incentive program. This really got modeled off of the Medicare STARS program, where member experience became an increasingly big focus. So we developed almost a parallel program for our commercial population. It is very much in the pilot stage. We've rolled it out to a couple primary care groups. It is being funded right now. So PEB membership is in the denominator. It is being funded by a fixed amount of money. So PEB, it's not kind of as a withhold or something, but the PEB members will be part of the denominator of the measurement for this program. And we hope kind of over the years, when we have more of a baseline and more experience under our belt, to continue to expand that because we recognize, along with quality and total cost of care, member experience is a really important component. Okay, next slide. Okay, So I just wanted to spend a little bit of time. You presented or saw our previous percentages, I think, from 2021. We did in 2023 and will continue in 2024 a really big push towards working with primary care groups only and really getting them to dip their toe into a 3B downside risk arrangement. So I want to reiterate what Bill said. This does not, the hospitals are not at risk. The 10, 6, 7 hospitals are not at risk. We share the same challenges, and it's, was helpful to hear the conversation previously about their perspective on hospitals and the 200% of Medicare. So these are primary care groups. We rolled out a total cost of care program, which is pretty straightforward. It's total cost of care, of course, not risk adjusted, because in this arrangement, there's not a risk adjustment, with a trend target and quality gate. So the quality gate for any group that has this total cost of care, they also had to be participating in our pay for performance program. So the pay for performance program that I previously outlined is the quality gate. The way it works is they have to earn some money on their pay for performance quality program to be eligible for the upside on this program. We've rolled it out to, the way we've calculated it is it's 55. We anticipate in 2024 that 55 to 60% of our allowed claim dollars. So that would, include 100% of the allowed claim dollars, not pharmacy, for a member who is assigned or attributed to a primary care who is in this model. So that's the way the percentage of dollars is actually higher on choice than it is on statewide. This is a combination. I think choice we were targeting in 24 could get up near 70%, and statewide would be lower. But in aggregate, this is the level of the percentage of allowed dollars that we are targeting. I did want to note, we have rolled out, I didn't assign any dollars to this, but we have rolled out one of our first specialty pay for performance programs with a large dialysis provider partnered with a nephrology group, and they are at risk for dollars, and this includes PEB. They are at risk for dollars associated with, they have several metrics, and if anybody's interested in a different setting, we can give you more detail, but they are at risk based on several metrics on the nephrology side. So that was a really exciting, dialysis is obviously a big spend. So that's a really exciting new program for us. I wanted to just, and I'll probably give you guys back some time. Some of the, besides the thing we mentioned on the hospital side of not being interested in participating in downside risk programs. One of the we have a few challenges, even in rolling out kind of in targeting a higher percentage of allowed dollars. One is we really looked, and there are some groups that have a lot of PEB membership, and those are the groups we really tried to target in this initial outreach. But there are a lot of PEB members spread across a lot of small primary care groups. So the primary care group may have a very few number of PEB members. This honestly is a problem in general of adoption of value-based in Oregon, where there is just continues to be a lot of small independent practices that for any given payer have very low membership. And there's been a lot of work, and we, along with MODA, have participated in the Primary Care Collaborative, which is an attempt to at least align the programs together across payers, but it's still a big challenge just because there are so many independent practices not aggregated into any kind of organization. The other challenge is that 18% of our PEB members we cannot attribute to a PCP. The vast majority of those are in statewide, obviously, because in choice, they choose and are assigned to a PCP. We have a very small number in choice who never choose. And most of those, I think, are when PEB is secondary, when PEB is not the primary insurance. Sometimes they never choose a medical home, but the vast majority of these are unattributed. And that's really, is a challenge just because we can't kind of capture those dollars anywhere. So going into 2024, we are really going to continue to focus on adoption of the 3B model that we have rolled out. It is a challenge, as Bill said, to get providers to be willing to take any downside risk. So we are, taking the steps we can with the providers we can to start to introduce that. We have chosen, although it's something we can certainly look at, we have chosen not to introduce an upside only model. Certainly that would be, easier to get adoption, but it's something we'll continue to talk to PEB about going into 2024, about thinking about whether we should, look at the potential of an upside only model. So those are my formal remarks. I take any questions.
Jeff, I see your hand is up, but I'm not sure if that was from before. Is that a current question or a previous question? Oh,
That was previous.
okay, great.
Okay.
All right. Well, hearing no questions, thanks much for the comments. And I think we certainly are interested in having some further conversation to sort of better understand some of the particulars around the things planned. So yeah, we will look forward to to setting some time for that.
Okay. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Jeff, how do you feel about a break for?
I feel just terrific about a break.
Great. Do you think, yeah, let's, what do you think, Margaret? I mean, can we adjust things to give ourselves 10 minutes?
I think so. Yeah, we have a 10-minute break on the agenda right now. So let's go for it. We can come back at 3:08 and I think we'll be able to make up some time.
Great. Thank you.
All right.
Thanks.
just gonna keep moving us along. I don't know, Jeff, if you wanna commandeer the agenda here, but otherwise, I think we're back through, 309, right? Should
Right,
we head
you
on to
are.
should we head on to the next item?
Yeah.
Centers of Excellence.
Let's do it.
Thank you, Sean. Mercer's here to present Centers of Excellence and update on our program development. It's been a couple of months since we last talked, and there's been some developments, and we'll want to present that to you. So moving on to the next slide. What we want to do is kind of provide a little bit of context. We are showing you a presentation, and we're not going to go through some of the slides in much detail. We're kind of going to gloss over it because a lot of it is information that we provided before to the IWG. But we're including in this presentation because we're going to provide a form of this presentation to both the OEB and PEB boards to give them an update on where we are on the COE and help them understand the potential impacts of a COE for the rest of this year, next year, and the year following. So what we're going to do, focus in our portion of the conversation is really the additional developments, the additional data, and answering some of the questions that were posed a couple of months ago. So any questions on that before we move on? Okay, let's go to next. Thank you. So we're going to be talking about 5 different items. The first one, why consider Center of Excellence? We'll just briefly go through those. And the history, we'll briefly go over that, although we do have some stakeholder meeting update. And then we'll have some additional claims information in part 2, and then we'll talk a little bit about 3, 4, and 5 based on the developments that we have. So moving on. So quickly, so basically this is some of the information that was provided before on why considering a COE. So this is the historical information from a few years ago, a couple of years ago, and we'll just provide this to the OEB and PEB board to kind of ground them on where, the decision making for the COE. And then moving on. The value of a COE. I'm not sure if we necessarily state it in these terms, but really, where is the value of a COE? It's prioritizing early interventions for surgery alternatives, which is part of that 30% potentially of surgeries that are unnecessary, and also making sure that the 70% are necessary and appropriate, and that the members are put in the best available position to have that surgery and not have readmissions or complications. And then also try to steer members to the highest quality facilities and, improving their quality and reducing outcomes and complications and overall saving money for the plan and the members in this case. The next slide. The history of development. So this is just kind of the 2001 is kind of there on the left, and some of the things we did there. 2021, 2022. The transition happened with the change in consultants, and so the additional information. And we did provide, based on the clarified and APAC data, a tiered ranking of facilities, and that tiered ranking is actually making a little bit of a comeback in this presentation, just to kind of show updated claims information and where members are getting their services. But we are going to redo the data with the updated APAC information, and that will be provided later this year. And so for 23, we worked on identifying that data partner to do that APAC data and the quality metrics, talked about the plan design, and then in March, we had stakeholder discussions to talk to the carriers about some of the information that we provided in February of 23. And on the next slide. So this is some of the feedback that we heard. It was a meeting with the plans, which ended up, there's a lot of barriers that the plans indicated were there in terms of developing a COE. Some of it had to do with contracting, the steerage of members to tier 1 facilities, whether the data was accurate, and whether it's credible. And also there was comments about provider capacity across facilities, and that those contracting requirements or steering could result in delayed or interrupted care. So that was some of the feedback that we heard from the plants. Some other feedback that we heard from board members, they were concerned about the travel that might be required to some members, and that maybe burdensome to find a top quality facility, especially if there's plan design impacting that, and whether travel benefits going to be good enough to cover that, and dissatisfaction, potential dissatisfaction if your access and choice is reduced. And so based on that feedback, there were some discussions internally, and what was decided was to reevaluate and prioritize, essentially redetermine the opportunity based on the expanded APAC data. So once we get the data and it's run and we have all of the metrics, we will take another look, take a look at the quality of the facilities and determine, the opportunity, the need for COE and tiering of facilities. But in terms of that, when we get that information, I guess jumping to bullet number 3 under there, if we do have a quality list of quality providers that is trustworthy and we trust the data, then what can we do to improve the usage, drive utilization to those providers? And in one of the concerns that we heard during the prior meetings that was brought up by the IWG were surgical alternatives. If we are requesting that members meet certain criteria before they have surgery, what about those members who don't meet those criteria? What can be done for them? And we did provide some information, or get some information, so we'll provide some of that. But that's going to be some of the focus, at least for this initial year. And the plan design incentives that based on the tiers and the availability of providers and the quality of providers, we'll revisit that as we get the data. And we also want to investigate, the concerns about provider capacity and whether the providers themselves, would be willing in the plans to support this type of program, because we did hear lots of concerns during the meeting, and we want to be able to acknowledge that and understand, and hear them, and to verify and find ways to potentially mitigate those impacts as we move forward in this program. Margaret and Jeff, I think you were on the stakeholder feedback. I guess to put you on the spot, is there anything else that you might remember or want to bring up regarding some of those conversations?
Jeff, I can I'll go first then. I was waiting to see if you wanted to chime in. I think one thing that was really sort of part of these discussions too was talking about the importance of really building awareness among members if we're going to make a change to the benefits program and where they can seek services. Really focusing some very concerted effort on enhancing member understanding of the rationale behind why it is preferable to go to certain places for these procedures, why the benefit design would be structured the way it is. And so it kind of leads down a road around building that member education and awareness through transparency and data, but also data that is sort of easy to understand and digest and accessible in a way that members are able to readily absorb. So that's a whole undertaking in and of itself in terms of that data transparency and awareness building effort. And so I think, in that regard, there's certainly a portion of this work that needs to be dedicated to that, building that information so that it's something that members can look at and understand and help inform their decision making. And Jeff, I don't know if you have any other thoughts to add.
No, I would just put an exclamation mark after communication with the end user in mind. It's the first thing that a lot of people are going to go to is, oh, you're just doing this to save money. And while we hope that's a reasonable byproduct, the reason we're doing this is for better quality healthcare. So.
Yeah, and that's a big part of our project plan, and we have some preliminary thoughts on that we'll present. But it will be one of those things. It is one of those things that we're working on in the meantime for 23 to really address the members and getting them that we'll have the information, but what's the best way of getting that information? And there's going to be multiple stakeholders there. It's not just the members, but it's carriers and providers as well. So just kind of getting that communication out there to really get everyone on board on what is quality and how to utilize that quality. Okay, thank you. So moving on. So where do we go now? So this is kind of a summary of some of the stuff that we talked about. We are going to get the data on the fall quality, but we don't plan on or don't anticipate for right now asking the boards to make plan design changes or the plans to recontract for 24. So information for 20, for the immediate future, and then for 25, potentially as we go through this communication and stakeholdering, at that point, we would potentially look at asking about plant design changes and contracting based on tiers and stuff like that. So development of the program is continuing, but we are delaying the implementation plan. So everything gets kind of pushed back a little bit on the hard plan design features, but the member aspect of it, the communication with the providers, as talking about, will be our focus for the near term. So we will get that APAC data, take a look at the baselines, at the quality, scoring across all of the providers, trying to make sure we understand and trust that data to better understand and have that transparency on the quality of the facilities and what we can do to identify the high quality facilities that we believe members should go to get better care. And so that outreach is going to happen. Next slide, please. So what we wanted to do was, take another look at some of the data with the updated information. And in this case, for OLEB, it's actually through calendar year of 22. So current time period includes the most recent 12 months through December of 22 on an incurred basis. For PEB, everything's delayed about a month. So that's why it's under current. So PEB's actually December 21 through November of 22. And this is information from the Meritive database. So what you see here may not match exactly to what was provided before through APAC or Clarify in terms of complications and stuff like that, because this is what Meritive defines as a complication. This is what Meritive defines as a surgery and the separation of inpatient and outpatient. But what we want to do was take a look at the knee and hip surgeries to redefine how big, how many people are having these surgeries, as well as where are they having the surgeries and are they still traveling. And so one interesting thing, at least from the top table, which is the number of surgeries that are performed for OLEB and PEB and total OLEB and PEB by inpatient and outpatient is, well, on this slide, you can see the number of surgeries actually has dropped in current versus prior and prior to. So prior to did include some of the COVID pandemic immediate time period. And taking a look at that, there wasn't this huge return, at least over that 1 year for the year following. So the number of surgeries has been relatively steady. And then in the current time period, it actually has dropped. And for additional context, pre-COVID, number of surgeries for OLEB and PEB was 670. So what does this tell us? Is there a capacity issue? Well, if there's a capacity issue, it's because they're reducing the number of surgeries that they want to perform. Because right now, the number of surgeries has gone down. So that's an interesting point, interesting data point that we got from the latest information. And this is for OLEB and PEB. So maybe OLEB and PEB's just different from the rest of Oregon, and the rest of Oregon's having more surgeries. But in this case, for OLEB and PEB, there isn't a huge rush, a huge number of members having surgery. The other issue that that other, I guess not issue necessarily, but interesting data point. If you take a look at the inpatient versus outpatient, you can see there is a big switch between inpatient and outpatient over the time period. And pre-COVID, the inpatient surgeries outnumber the outpatient. So there's a definite switch over to the outpatient surgeries in this case. And it's almost, with inpatient, it's so few, really, right? I mean, we're getting down to 20%, where 3 years ago it was over 50%. So that was an interesting data point, I thought. Any questions on that before I talk about the regions down below?
The only point is, while inpatient versus outpatient, it still may be occurring in the hospital setting.
Yes.
It's just the categorization of the patient, and meaning that they've learned how to get these people out of the hospital within 24 hours.
Yeah, that is definitely some of it. We did not do a match on the facilities in terms of which facilities are doing more than others. Well, which facilities have increased or decreased over the time period. That's something we can do to take a look at maybe the ASCs in particular, and whether certain facilities are doing more than others. I think there's definitely a difference in some of the facilities, some of the bigger name facilities, I guess, or there's certain hospitals that are still doing more inpatient than outpatient, but the vast majority are doing outpatient in this case. Jeff.
Yeah, well, we know how many hospitals there are in the state of Oregon, but I'm curious. It might be a little bit of a rabbit trail, but over the last 3 years, how many ambulatory surgical centers there are based over each year? Because my sense is more of those are being built regularly. And I recall that the data shows we really get pretty good results out of ASCs. So I'm just kind of curious on that.
Yeah, I don't have the exact number of ASCs. I do have the information by all the hospitals and the ones that we ranked. I will have to get the exact number for you. I don't know if some of them are. I'll have to check to see if any of them are new in the state of Oregon versus, moving. I'd have to check to get that information for you, but we can look into it. So the bottom slide shows the surgeries by year, by the various regions. So you can take a look at which regions potentially are having more or fewer surgeries. I think Willamette Valley, is kind of general tied. There's a lot of them that are it's very similar across all the regions. Maybe the metro area members are getting fewer surgeries. It looks like a little bit of a bigger drop off between the current and the prior, and as well as the coast. I think the coast, at least on a percentage basis, it's a bigger drop off. In Central, the current's bigger than prior, but the prior had a pretty big drop off compared to the prior two. So that may just be timing, and it's also smaller size. But overall, I guess, it looks like the drop is pretty consistent across all regions. So it's not just one, part. Everyone's still getting their surgeries, just at a slightly lower rate, at least in the most recent time period. Moving on to the next slide. So a little bit more detail on the member region. So we have this, again, the regions, and this is for all 3 years in total. So the members there across the top. So if you take a look at the columns, those are the specific, based on the zip codes, where the member is residing. So Central would be those here in the Bend, the Oregon area, and then you would have, out of state, and then members who are in the Willamette Valley, and so on and so forth. And then going up to down, those are where the facilities that they're having the surgeries. And so the order is in the same order. And so you can see the boxes for those who are having the surgeries in the same locations. And then if it's not in that box, they're essentially moving regions to get their surgery. And taking a look at that, you can see down at the bottom the total number of surgeries over the 3 years and the percentage that stay in the region. So going from left to right, you have 88% of the people in the central region, Central Oregon, having surgeries in there. So about 56 surgeries and about 90%, which is what, like 50, 51%, actually probably 50% are having, or 50 are having surgeries in the central, 49 I should just take a look at the number. 49 having the surgeries out of the 56, and so 7 have moved. And in the coast region, you can see the difference there, where 34% are staying in the region. So only 35 of the 102 are staying there. There are people who are going to the metro area. There are people who are going to Southern Oregon, people going to Willamette Valley, or going out of state. So there is a significant number of those on the coast who are moving to have their surgeries. The metro region is at 84%. This movement, there's some out of state, which would probably be up to Washington, and then Willamette Valley down into the Salem area. But very little movement. Travels, probably not very significant, maybe an hour or so. Well, assuming good traffic, of course. Northeast region, there's a lot more movement, but that's to the out of state. So people going to Washington potentially, or Idaho. So if you're on the border, you potentially could go out of state for those. And about 55% do move. Southeast region, they're moving out of state. So they're probably moving to Idaho in this case to have their surgery. Southern region, most of them are staying there. Some do drive up north to the Willamette Valley. Willamette Valley is similar to Metro, where most of the surgeries are kind of being performed in that same area. A lot fewer for out of state, but some people are going to the Portland metro area to have their surgery. And then the out of state members, some of them, live on the borders, and so they maybe go to the metro area, but looks like most of them are kind of staying with their state facility, which of course are uncapped. So the pricing could be different, could be higher in this case, and there might be some additional value potentially, depending on where they're located out of state, to have them in maybe the Portland metro or Willamette Valley area for the surgeries. So overall, about 27% are traveling for surgeries out of their region. Any questions or comments on this slide?
Looking at it doesn't really surprise me based on different places I've lived.
So the importance of a COE potentially could be different based on where the members are, right? So, the Willamette Valley, you're probably going to have, in metro area, you're going to have people probably going to the same providers. Well, hopefully the better quality ones, but, they're going to not have to travel. They're not going to travel. But the coast, southern, the outlying regions, the rural areas, really, that's where this is potentially the most impactful. Which I, kind of just, I don't know, it's what we expected, but we want to make sure that they're getting good quality in this case. Okay, moving on to the next slide. So this is bringing back the ranking of facilities that we did, the initial ranking based on the November 22 data. So what we did was take that ranking in terms of, where we put them in the top 15, top 30, and then essentially the bottom 33, which is, I guess, the rest of the 63 that we did rank. And there's the total, which includes some facilities that we didn't rank. Some of those are most of those are out of state in this case. But, we had 63 facilities that we ranked, and we kind of wanted to see, in terms of the number of surgeries, where they're having, whether they're having those in essentially what we initially were thinking were potentially high quality, and to see whether the results were high quality in this case. Just so the complication rate, again, is based on the Narrative database. So what they listed as a complication, we said that's a complication. And the ranking of facilities is going to change because we are getting updated APAC data. It's going to be all of Oregon plus some outlying areas, and we're going to have different metrics that are going to be used and consistent metric set. So the rankings will change in this case. But taking a look at the number of surgeries of the top 15 that we identified, so about a third are having their surgeries at the top 15. So it looks like maybe a little bit more, and then there's a little bit more of the members are utilizing those places, and then their percentages would be based on the facility, which is, I think, a good thing potentially if the top 15 are truly top 15. The top 30, so the top half has more than half. So of the about 1,800 surgeries 1,100 of them are going to the facilities we have ranked in the top 30. And so that leaves the bottom 33, which is, about, I don't know, 25, 30, a little bit more than 25%, maybe close to 30%. So the bottom half would essentially have a smaller portion of the surgeries compared to the top half in this case. For the complication rate, the information was a little bit interesting, I think. The complication rates you can see between OAB, PEB, and TOL, between inpatient and outpatient, top 15, top 30, and bottom 33. So the total there on average, it's about 5.3% for inpatient and 0.7% for outpatient. So that kind of ties into maybe the riskier patients are going inpatient. And if you're healthy, you're going to go outpatient, and the complication rates are going to be lower. So in total, that's about 2%, 1.9% of PEB members and PEB and OAB members are having a complication based on the surgery. The interesting thing is really kind of when we stratify it by the tiers. The top 15, the inpatient complication rate, 7.2% compared to that 5.3% for the inpatient average. So the top 15 is actually having worse results. The same thing with the outpatient, 1.3%. And so their total complication rate is 2.2% compared to 1.9 for OAB and PEB in total. That said, one facility had a third of the inpatient complications and 100% of the outpatient complications in the top 15 data. So one facility is essentially making that top 15 ranking or results look kind of bad. So you take out that facility from the top 15 and the outpatient complication rate would be 0. So, I think that's definitely better. The inpatient complication rate would be closer to 5%. So that's about average. So removing that one facility, it does look potentially that at least top 15 is as good or maybe a little bit better than what OAB and PEB's getting in total. Kimberly.
So was it a particular doctor or was it just, I don't know about the rest of you, but I'm like going, well, I don't want anything fixed by whoever was doing that problem.
Yeah. We're not going to name the facility. I think it's one that we're going to bring up. There's some interesting conversations that are going to happen as a result of seeing that data. We'll see what the APAC data says, whether this is just an anomaly for PEB and OAB, or, maybe the complication metric for Meritive was, just, I don't know, done differently. We'll look into it. I guess actually, I think Tom was the next name that popped up.
I just don't know how how a facility with that high of a complication rate can be in our top 15. It means that we need to prioritize complications in a way that if you have 1 out of 3 of your inpatient cases resulting in a complication, you're either operating on the wrong person who shouldn't be operated on, or there's a technique problem that Kimberly is raising.
Yeah, that is something we're going to raise, just trying to make sure, talk about the qualifications, right, that they're doing it, well, number one, I think we'll want to just verify, they're seeing the same thing in their data. This is the Meritive database, maybe their data is going to be different. We'll verify that. But, the requirements that we're saying, are you screening the patient appropriately? We will want to look at that and to make sure, that's being followed and whether there's other issues there. But yes, those are definitely some of the questions we want to ask. Margaret?
Yeah, thanks. I essentially just had the same comment as Tom, that it's just trying to understand how a facility with complications that high would make the cut to be in the top 15, and whether that merits sort of a relook at our weighting or at how that calculation for the top facilities is factoring all that in. So duly noted.
Yeah. JJ?
Yeah, not to pile on, but when you say top 15, I don't even know what the hell that means if the top is the worst. So if top means the most complications, then yeah, we should be looking at the bottom.
Yes.
Do you mean like largest providers in the top? Because
No,
it's clearly not based on complications.
No, it really was based on what the quality rate, the quality rankings were. We wanted to see if, that quality ranking was being borne out by this information. And it, it doesn't appear, I mean, that doesn't appear to be so, at least for this, especially for this one facility. And I think we need to look into exactly why this is happening. So we'll definitely look into it. And there's probably, I think data is, we'll look into it. I mean, it's going to be something we'll want to verify. Cindy.
Sorry, I hit my hand by accident.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
Yeah.
And I think just to add to Emery, to what you said, right? The top 15, that calculation methodology was also different than how Meritive is calculating complications, right? So the top 15 is based on a different methodology, and based on that, which is for the most part risk adjusted. And Meritive data, again, we would not be, right, as far as I know, that it is not risk adjusted. So there are some data nuances that, again, the within the table itself, there are two different data sources and two different methodologies. So I just want to make sure, that's clear, which is probably one of the biggest reasons why the top 15 data is looking worse off than, the rest of the group. But as Emery mentioned, still that one facility that's standing out is definitely worth the conversation.
Thank you. Yeah, I was going to mention, thanks for reminding me. Yeah, it's this claims information that we have is not risk adjusted. So the complication rates, for the metrics are risk adjusted. So, if they are taking on riskier members, and that's, resulting in higher complications, it's going to show up here and may not show up as much in the other data. But I guess the flip side is, are they properly assessing those riskier members at that point? But we will definitely look into this. And just one other quick data note, the outpatient, there's a pretty big difference between OEP and PEB in terms of complication rate, considering the number of surgeries. So that's a little bit interesting in my mind, that I don't know why PEB's so much higher, but it is higher in this case. Next
As a member of OEB, I'm sure we're just healthier.
Shots fired.
I was thinking the same thing, actually. Yeah.
But if the one facility that you're mentioning is in the Willamette Valley, where a higher percentage of PEB employees are, that would explain it also.
Yeah, that's true.
So we need to dive about 2 or 3 levels below that to figure it out.
Yeah, I'm just looking at the information. The number of surgeries performed at a facility was pretty similar between OEB and PEB. PEB actually did have more outpatient complications.
Fascinating.
Yes, it is. Yeah.
The only other, it is interesting, one of the biggest differences between OEB and PEB is smoking prevalence. It's like 2 to 1.
Okay.
And I don't know whether, one of the criteria for elective orthopedic surgeries is the person doesn't smoke for, 6 weeks to 6 months before they have surgery. And it'd be interesting. That would be an interesting metric or thing to include in our eventual recommendations in terms of patient selection.
Yeah, actually, non-smoker for at least 30 days is part of it.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
Yep.
Moving on to the next slide. So in terms one question that has been brought up was really, how much does the facility performing lots of surgeries impact quality? And so we did want, I mean, and so based on that tiering, we also put in a qualifier of yes or no if they had 50 surgeries or more in November. And so what we did here was to kind of separate out those who performed at least 50 surgeries per year in our data set versus those who didn't, and the results. So the numbers of procedures that you can see there, as you might expect, the facilities that perform the most surgeries have the most surgeries. So, I have about 1,200 of the surgeries compared to those smaller facilities, which is about 540. The cost per procedure is a little bit different. About 3,200, 32,000 for the facilities for the episode cost based on the Merit data for those who perform at least 50 surgeries or more per year compared to 34,000. Some of that probably has to do with, the fact that it's the bigger facilities are going to be DRG facilities capped at the 200% versus the uncapped. And so that's going to be part of it. But to get to, I guess, the complication rate down at the bottom, do the bigger facilities have fewer complications? And the answer there is mixed. For inpatient, the answer is yes. They do have fewer complications, 4.8%, which is very close to the 5.3 in total for OEB and PEB. And the smaller facilities had 8% complications out of the 75 surgeries. So, the number of surgeries performed inpatient was a bigger difference, a lot more inpatient for these bigger facilities, about 400, and about 5% of those had a complication versus 8% of the 75. So we'll get a little bit more into what does that tell us about the quality of these facilities in the next couple slides. And then the outpatient there on the right is interesting to me in that you have 844 surgeries. 1.1% of those had complications for the larger facilities. So those had 50 or more surgeries had 844 surgeries and had 1% complication rate for outpatient. But the smaller facilities essentially had zero. So 465 surgeries had zero complications. And so what does that tell us about the quality of those facilities? JJ.
I'm confused by your numbers here in the total down at the bottom right. The complication rate under the yes is 2.3, but it's lower under most of them than the no/unknown. I don't know how that could be.
Yeah, so the higher percentages are for those no unknown are for the inpatient, but then the weighting of the inpatient, they had significantly fewer inpatient surgeries as a portion of the total. So there's 540 surgeries in total for those smaller facilities. 75 of them, which is about 15%, were done inpatient. So the other 85% were done outpatient. So the weighting on the outpatient complication rate is much higher. And so it ends up being 1.1. But if you take a look at the larger facilities, about a third was inpatient. So there's more weighting on the inpatient complications in this case, the 4.8.
Okay, and do they just not have hardly any outpatient because they're all at zero?
You're talking about the smaller facilities?
Mm-hmm.
No. So for OEB, there were 259 surgeries with zero complications at the smaller facilities.
Okay.
For PEB, there were 206 surgeries with zero complications. So in total, there's 465 surgeries with zero complications.
Okay.
So if you just compare it to the 0.7% average, they outperformed. But what does that mean? We're actually going to talk a little bit about that in the next couple slides. And so let's actually move to the next slide. So what we're trying to show here is essentially a version, and I'm not an official statistician, so all you statisticians can shoot arrows at me. I'm going to say p-value like testing. So I'm just going to put caveats around this whole thing. But essentially what we're trying to do is answer the question, the null hypothesis, about whether facility volume, like the bigger facilities, perform better. And so, as I mentioned before, the numbers look kind of they're different for inpatient and outpatient. But what does that tell us? So what we wanted to do was essentially say, if you have a 5.3% complication rate based on random statistics, what would be the percentiles? If it's just completely random, what would be the percentiles for a surgery? So if you had complication rate, you're doing, let's just say 450 surgeries and you had a complication of 10%, that's bad. But how bad is that bad? And based on randomness, where do you fall where do you fall on the statistical curve? And so what we can do for that is to basically say, are the results due to randomness? Would we expect it based on randomness, or there's an actual statistical significance around the results of what we just saw on the prior slide? So what we did here was, for the smaller facilities, we have the gold star. And for the bigger facilities, we have the red X. And so on the left, you can see the star there, kind of way on the far left at about the 8%. So they had an 8.2% complication rate based on the 75 surgeries. So where does that fall statistically? Can we say that they're worse than what we would have expected? And the result is that's the 85th percentile. So, a 50th would be the median, which is, at this point, about 6% based on, one complication out of the 75 surgeries. So if you kind of go up and down that line, it would be 50 percentiles, that purple triangle line. So you would expect that's around 6.5%. So you expect on average, 50th percentile would be around there. The 95th percentile is the green line up above. So you can see that the inpatient results for these smaller facilities is worse than the median, but not quite up to the 95th percentile. You could say 99th percentile is definitely statistically significant. 95th percentile is pretty bad. So maybe we would rank those poorly and want to move those out. So what we're saying here is, the performance is worse. It's worse than median, worse than average, but it may not be, I don't know if this is an official statistical term, but horribly worse. So, it is worse. And then when we take a look at the larger facilities, their complication rates right around average. And that's about essentially the 33rd percentile in this case. And so does that mean it's bad or it's better? It's a little bit better, but it doesn't mean they're definitely outperforming. No, we can't say that based on statistics. And actually, I apologize. The 67th percentile is the purple triangles, the 50th percentile is the yellow with the X. And JJ. Did you have a question, JJ? You're on mute.
Yeah, there we go. I'm not an idiot. Well, at least not on this. Are we considering doing a center of excellence for exclusively inpatient procedures or inpatient and outpatient? Because it seems to me that there isn't a substantive difference in outpatient. So I'm concerned about return on investment when it comes to outpatient results.
That's a good question. I think we were definitely focusing on inpatient and outpatient. I think, there are some, you would expect the facilities to do well on outpatient. I don't know. I think we would take a look at it and try to see if there is a consistent, I guess, if the underperformance of some facilities is consistent across the board for inpatient and outpatient. And maybe that's really, the tier 3 where we really don't recommend you go to it and everyone else is fine. But that's something we'll definitely look at in the metrics. But when we've been considering this, it's been for both inpatient and outpatient.
And we're also considering ASCs, right?
Yes, we are definitely considering ASCs.
Yeah.
Did you have another question, JD? No. Okay. Okay. And on the next slide, we talk about the outpatient results for the large versus the small facilities. So right now, using a 0.7% expected rate, what would we say would be the percentiles, and is it statistically significant in terms of the performance? So again, the gold star for the low volume and the red X for the larger facilities. So the red X is there on the right. They had almost 850 surgeries. They were at 1.1%, which is a 90th percentile result. So that's actually, in terms of percentile, it's worse than the inpatient results for the small facilities. So they're getting closer to the statistical significant line in this case. But if we take a look at the low volume surgeries, having 0 complications on 465 surgeries, that's a first percentile result. So in terms of the hypothesis of whether low volume facilities are worse than large volume facilities, statistically, we could say that no, the performance, at least for OF and PEB, is not the case. It's been disproven for outpatient surgeries. For inpatient surgeries, maybe that actually is the case, but for outpatient, I guess to your point, JJ, they're performing quite well. And what maybe there isn't as much value as doing a tiering on outpatient, other than maybe just identifying the really bad performers and trying to get them to improve. These charts also, I think, will help inform how we're going to try to rank these facilities, because we're going to take a look at the results, where they fall on essentially these percentiles, and use that to stratify the facility. So if you're in the middle of these bars, you're average. You're not statistic. It's potentially randomness that made you a little bit worse or a little bit better, and so you might get an average score. But if you're at the very bottom or very top, that's where we would want to probably stratify you to really identify who are the good and the bad performers in this case. And thus ends the math lesson, I guess. Moving on. So what we want to do here was show, again, the guiding principles, the values for a COE. And so these are essentially the same as what we had talked about. I think there might have been a little bit of wordsmithing compared to what was presented, but these are essentially the guiding principles that the Mercer team will use, and the IWG has accepted to move forward on the COE and potentially, any other innovation that we're going to be working on. Some of these guiding principles go across multiple types of innovations, but this is specific to the COE. And then the next slide has the second page of guiding principles. So we have 13 of them. And so, just wanted to let you see this, and we'll go into this in more detail with the PEB board members. The project plan. So we did talk a bit about this, so I'll just kind of hit the highlights. So we're in the near term, we are focusing on getting the data and trying to help support and educate based on the data points. So we're going to take the APAC data, develop the baseline for the quality metrics, and rank them, take a look at it, and share that information with the PEB and OAB members transparently and hopefully easily understood, so it can help impact care decisions and quality outcomes. We are also going to talk to the providers and carriers using that data to try to impact the care decision and quality improvement. And hopefully, there's been concern about, are we getting in the right number of surgeries? Do we have enough number of surgeries to say, these metrics are actually, true? Do these actually represent the quality of these providers? And hopefully some of the information, on the prior pages can show you that, at certain points, we can definitely say that they are true. If you're outperforming below or above, that's where we want to, make sure we educate and communicate with those providers and facilities that are at the bottom and top ends, and maybe particularly with the bottom ends, because you really don't want your members to go and have a complication. But you do want them to have better care, but maybe cutting out the bottom 10% is really where we end up going, or trying to drive people away from that bottom 10%. So phase 2 will be essentially what we were trying to do earlier, which is to develop plan design incentives, disincentives, really focus on the providers, contractual requirements, adherence to that criteria that we're going to go over, and alternatives for patients who don't meet that criteria. So that's again the project plan that we've revised. Next slide. Some areas where we're talking about the education and steerage. So these are the three main stakeholders, and this is a little bit more detail on how we want to potentially address that. So for carriers, we want to talk to them about, like have them figure out, when the member inquires about their benefits for knee surgeries, have them talk about this information, have them directed to the quality providers before they actually do have the surgery. Excuse me.
So I think we have like 1 minute left. Is there
Sorry.
is there a
Yes.
kind of way to summarize our conclusion?
We will try to educate based on some of these points. Moving on to the next slide. We will update project plan. We talked about that. Let's keep moving. So clinical quality. So these are repeat of what we had before, but the next couple slides really talks about why they're there. Well, actually, I guess this one, alternative therapy and conservative treatment. So Sean, to your point, as to alternatives for those who don't meet, there's certain things here in terms of what we want you to do before the joint surgery, and then other things that could be done if you don't quite meet those. We want you to try to do the weight loss. There's potential other types of treatments that could be handled before having that surgery that might help alleviate some of your issues. But we can go over that in detail later. Next slide. And this is like some additional things that can be done to help get those members that don't necessarily initially qualify to get those strategies to get to the clinical goals. So these are some of the steps we can get, we can talk about this with, Tom and some of the others, doctors, and the plans. But the next slide has the other page of clinical goals.
Yeah, and I would just say that for when we talk about COEs optimizing patients or making sure that patients are in the best shape so that we can minimize complications and readmissions and things like that. These are some of the key areas, and just, that doesn't mean we just toss them, and say, oh, sorry, you're not in good enough shape for surgery. These are the things that we would actually expect the COEs to work with the PCP to do to get them in better shape so that they would be minimizing their risk for surgery.
Yep. And yeah, so hopefully, Sean, that answers, I think, one of your big concerns about that was brought up a couple of meetings ago, or in February, March, whatever. Yes.
Thank you.
Yeah. Sorry about the time. Any additional questions, comments?
The only thing I have to add is it sounds like we ended up moving from one way of looking at complications to another one, and we need to be sure, and that resulted in some significant changes in outcome of ranking. I need to understand that further, and it has to be, if you look at it from one direction and you get one result, and you look at it from a somewhat different direction and you get an entirely different result, that causes a lot of problems
Yes.
in terms of the communication. So we're going to need to understand that better.
Yeah. Yes, and I
You don't
think
have to answer it now, Emery, but just if we could, at an upcoming meeting, understand the differences between the two different methodologies and why we had such, hugely different outcomes.
Yeah, and hopefully the APAC data will help shed some light on that. I think
Great.
there is definitely some concerns regarding, I don't know if it's necessarily data mismatch, but it's just different data sources and
Super.
how we're collecting it. So that is definitely one of our concerns. But yes, definitely.
Thank you.
Yeah.
It sounds like we have some follow-up, some specific next steps, so appreciate it. Do we have public comment?
No, there's no public comment.
Okay.
Sorry, Margaret.
That's okay, Rose. Thank you for confirming. I was just going to say I don't believe we do and was going to ask you to confirm. So thank you for that.
Okay. Very good. Then I think our next work group meeting's on June 20th, unless something's changed. Is that right?
Yeah, that's correct, Sean. So we have a work group meeting scheduled for June 20th. And then historically, this work group takes the month of July and August off. So at this point, our planned meeting schedule is to meet in June and then reconvene in September.
Sounds good. Any last comments for the good of the order? So seeing none, we are adjourned. Thanks everybody for the
Thanks all.
presentation.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye,
Bye.
everybody. Thank you.